You cannot have happiness in your life without being grateful for what it is you're happy. The peace, the love, the joy, the happiness, it all is derived from the place of gratitude. Hey, what's up? This is Brad. I had to think of my name, man. This is Brad with Be Real. Hey, I'd gotten a text a couple weeks ago from my good friend Cash, and she was like, "Hey, man, do a podcast on like getting out of your own way." And so this podcast is going to be things to stop doing. And it's not necessarily negative, but there's always things that we should add to our arsenal, and there's always things that we should take away from our arsenal that aren't working. You know, if it's not bearing fruit, why would you keep doing it? And so one of the things that Cash and I both talked about is confidence, by not having confidence. And I've been thinking about that. And I can talk from my personal experience is, you know, it's crazy that I'll get into situations and I'll be not as confident in the situation or not as confident in myself as I should be. And then I'll kind of verbalize it with my wife. And she's like, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?" And then I start to realize that sometimes I don't even have the confidence in myself that my family and my friends have in me. You know, I always say probably one of my biggest prayers for my friends is see yourself like I see you and see yourself like God sees you. And if you see yourself like your friends see you, 99% of the time you would have more confidence in what you're doing. So that's probably the number one thing is, and then once you have that confidence, I'll go some other things in a second, but it's extremely important. And that responsibility of us being confident in ourselves, it's kind of like happiness. It is solely on our shoulders. It's something we have to manifest. It's something we have to work on, you know, not to keep bringing up the wife, but I found that when I get into certain situations and I start to worry, well, what I'll do is when I start finally kind of verbalize that with my wife, she's like, "No, no, no." And then she'll tell me 2 or 3 things that happened the last time we were in this situation, positive things that happened in this situation, or things that God did in this situation that made that situation better the last time we were there. And then I started to realize that my wife, what she's doing is what I preach. She is constantly reminding herself of the good things and constantly seeing all the blessings, where I have a tendency of trying to see potholes before I even get to them. And then 90% of the time when I'm driving down the road, I'm worried about these potholes. And when I'm driving down the road of life, I'm worried about these potholes. And by the time I get to the road, they fix the pothole. And so I've been worried and stressed about something that didn't even happen, you know? The other thing I've talked about before is a big thing is you got to stop the negative self-talk. You know, we have about 3,000 words per minute inner thoughts in our heads. Let me back up. You know, there's a famous saying that says, tell me the 5 people you spend the most time with and I'll tell you your future. And I just this kind of was laid on me the last couple of days. Take the 5 people you spend the most time with, you know, and that's going to determine your success. You know, whatever situation you're in. Now think about this. You spend 10 times more time with yourself than you do all those people combined. So the biggest cheerleader in your life should be you, and the biggest adversary in your life can be you. And like I said, I'm not necessarily being negative. It's just something we have to work on. The last thing I did the research on this deal, you know, is 3,000 words per minute, and 70% of those words tend to be negative if we don't work on it. So it's extremely important to work on the self-doubt, work on that inner dialogue, work on that self-talk. And, you know, like I said, just like confidence, you have to foster those things. You know, you remember failure 4 times longer than you do success. So guess what? And I'm not great at this. So guess what? You've got to remind yourself 4 times more about the things that have gone well for you. You've got to point out in your head 4 things that are amazing in your life. It's extremely important for us to do those for ourselves. Make better decisions. And I'll tell you, man, slow down would be the first thing I would tell you. Normally, the first answer that pops in your head is normally the right answer. And then I'll give you an example of this. There was an interview, Sam Bradford, when he was in the NFL, they did an interview with him, and they said, "What's the best advice you ever got?" And he said, "Well, when I was a freshman going to OU, I walked on the campus." He goes, and some coach, I don't even remember who it is, he walks up to me. You can imagine he's a superstar when he hits the campus. He's going to get invitations to go do all kinds of things. And he said, the old coach goes, "Listen, man, here's the deal. If somebody asks you to do something and there's a little voice in your head says, I wonder if I should do that, the answer is always no." Now think about that. How many times have we had that little voice in our head go, "It's probably not a good idea," and we did it anyway and go, "Dang, I wish I would have. And since I've heard that, I have a tendency when I have to make a decision to kind of slow down and kind of sense what I'm feeling. And if I have in the least slightest way have that thought in my head about, I wonder if I should do that, the answer is always no, or wait. But slow down, make good decisions. And then you're like, "Okay, Brad, I made a good decision. What do I do next?" Make another good decision. Do the right thing. Here's another one it's a little bit that you wouldn't maybe necessarily think I was talking about getting out of your own way, but it's hugely, hugely effective for yourself and for others, and that's forgiveness. That we get in our own way by not forgiving people, not forgiving ourselves. And forgiveness is a huge deal, and it can actually be a catapult in your life. And I'll tell you, I talked about that before in a podcast. Sometimes I get into situations where it's getting rocky or the situation's rocky, and I just walk in and be the bigger person. Go, "Hey, I just want to tell you guys, hey, well, I don't know how we got in this situation, but I'm going to take credit for it. It's all my fault," and it completely diffuses the situation. But it's the same thing on forgiving ourselves, and like the short version of it, I harbored all these unforgiveness for my dad. And actually, I mean, we were in good terms until he passed away. And then like 25 years later, I went and talked to somebody about it, and I was going over the whole dad deal. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, that's cool. That's cool." And he goes, "So how was your dad's dad?" I'm like, "Man, he was a piece of crap. He was terrible. My dad was in and out of orphanages and blah, 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 blah." And my friend goes, "So basically what you're telling me is actually your dad did better than his dad." I go, "Yeah, yeah. What he helped me to do was, instead of seeing all the faults in my dad, go, well, I mean, he did better than what his dad did." So forgiveness and that was a game changer for me. I'm just telling you, you will be amazed if you just made a list of the people that you need to forgive, or some people you need to call and ask for forgiveness. But you will be amazed at how that changes your life, and how that is, and to remember the things that those people did, or remember, negative situations that happened in your life. There again, it takes 4 times more energy to remember negative and to cultivate unforgiveness than it does just to forgive. So forgiveness is a big one. Procrastination. Napoleon Hill, you gotta stop procrastinating. There again, not one I'm great at, but you gotta stop procrastinating. Napoleon Hill did this big survey at the turn of the century on why people were so successful. And the reason the uber successful people were successful is they all had goals and they took action. The number one reason that people were not as successful as they should be is they procrastinated. Look, if you identify you're going to have to do something, and the majority of the things you're going to have to do them, get them out of the way now. I have a tendency of doing that in my life. That is something I do well. If I know I got to do something on a certain day, I do it as quick as I can in that day, because there's not going to be any better situation. There's not going to be any better energy than to start off the day. Another big one that can slow you down that you got to remove out of your way is comparing yourself to other people. Look, that's a killer, man. You cannot compare yourself to other people. And I've said this before. You have been sent to this earth with every tool you need to achieve what you're sent here to do. So why would you compare yourself to somebody else, or this person has that, or this person has this, or this person had this opportunity? No. You know why I have tools that you don't have? Is because I'm going someplace you're not going. And it's very important to remember, there's nothing but frustrate. Now, if you want to see something that somebody's doing and that inspires you and you want to celebrate what they're doing, great. That's a positive thing. But to look at somebody else and compare yourselves to somebody else and be envious of that person or be envious of something that's going on, that's the best thing it's almost like gratitude. The best thing you could do in that situation is celebrate those people, because I'm telling you, and you know what? If you don't have the tool you need right now for a certain situation, it's almost like a Mario game. You're gonna pick that tool up before you ever even need it. So anyway, don't compare yourself to other people. Fear of failure. Let's just get this out of the way right now. You're gonna fail. And everybody I've talked to, everybody uber successful person I've ever talked to, is they failed way more than they succeeded. Michael Jordan, greatest basketball player in the NBA ever in the NBA. He missed more shots than he made. All the baseball players in the Hall of Fame, they struck out at the base almost 65, 70% of the time. So basically, they only succeeded 30% of the time. So fear of failure will lock you up, man. You cannot be afraid of failure. Yes, slow down. Make good decisions. If it's been laid on your heart that you need to do it, you just need to do it. That fearlessness is not a situation where you never face fear. Fearlessness is facing fear on a regular basis and making a decisive action. So fear of failure is a bad one. Perfectionism, man, ain't no perfectionism. There ain't no such thing as perfection. There's only one thing that's been on this earth that's been perfect, and it ain't us. So perfectionists, and the reason this is too, it's like I talk to people and like, well, when I get this and I get this and I get this, then I'm going to do this. Bro, there's a good chance you might not ever get any of those things. But you have what you need today, and you can at least begin the process. You know, it's all about the process. It's not the outcome. So perfectionism is something that's another thing like fear that the enemy uses to lock you up. If the enemy can get you to be fearful and you stop, you lose. If procrastination can get you to stop, you lose. Procrastination procrastination, being fearful, and perfectionism, they're absolute killers to your life. The one other thing that I feel like, and this is something I've gotten better at, if you know you're going to be or going to have at some point in time a difficult conversation with somebody or a group of people, can I tell you something? The best time to do it's right now. If you know that there's a difficult conversation that's coming up on the road, whether that's with your significant other, if that's with your kids, if that's with your friends, I have in the past had a tendency of knowing that I need to have a difficult conversation with somebody, and what ends up happening is it escalates to the point I lose my cool, and now I made it worse. Where I should have a month ago, when it was kind of laid on my heart, I need to have this conversation with somebody, and it's not fair to them. So in the best, you know how the best way to start? Hey, do you mind if I sit down? Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions? Look, we need to have this difficult conversation. Do you mind if I have it now? Because probably if we have this difficult conversation now, we won't have to have a more difficult conversation later. So one of the things you need to get out of your way is procrastinating about talking to people about situations or difficult conversations that you need to have with people. Another thing that we have a tendency of doing sometimes is neglecting our health. And I've gotten better about it, but you know, there's only one of us, and the majority of us, there's a lot of people counting on us. And like Mickey Mantle said, you know, if I knew I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself. And so your health is extremely important. And if you're not taking good care of yourself and being healthy with yourself, it's all about what you're taking in that determines the outcome. Whatever you take in determines what you produce. Whatever you take in determines what you produce. That was just laid on me while I was sitting here talking. And so think back to this. So if you're consuming negative thoughts, then you're going to produce a negative outcome. If you're going to produce, negative decisions and make negative decisions, you're going to have production that is a negative outcome. So whatever you consume is going to determine what you produce. So it's extremely important to start consuming everything you can, better food, better words to yourself, better books, whatever the heck it is, music. It is important to you watch what you're consuming. Look, let's go on. They say that with computers, bad data in, bad data out. It's like this big railway. We are a factory ourselves, and it's this like big railway that's running into us, and we're bringing in negative thoughts. We're bringing in not so good food. We're not exercising, and then we're wondering why our production isn't where we want it to be. You've got to consume positive, great things and have positive, great actions if you want to produce positive, great things. The other thing that I'm not so good at, but I've gotten better, is resistance to change. Now, here's the irony of that deal. So none of us are like, yay, there's a bunch of change coming. But I'm just telling you, the only thing consistent in this world is change, which means it's going to keep changing. And there's a famous, one of the public speakers I heard one time, motivational speakers I heard one time, is it's no longer the big eating the small. It is the fast eating the slow. Now, he was talking about business. What he was saying is it's no longer as much about big companies eating little companies as it is fast companies are consuming slow companies. Like let's take Uber for example, and how they're eating into the cab industry. The reason is they are changing. They change quickly and caught them off guard. This other story, which is just kind of random. I was watching this week on the dynasties of cell phones. That in 2007, the CEO of the company of BlackBerry brought in an Apple phone to the designers of the people that were creating Blackberries. And he was like, dude, this just hit the market. This is a serious deal. Don't you think we need to make changes? And the people that designed the Blackberry said, who's going to use that touchscreen? Guess what? 2-3 years later, BlackBerry does not exist and Apple phones are killing it. So, but that's because somebody didn't change. It actually, what we really should be doing, we really should be looking for the positive change. Instead of trying to fight change, which you're never going to fight change, you can't stop it from happening. Kids are going to grow up. Relationships are going to grow a certain way. The best thing that you can do is to summarize where you're at in this situation and make the changes more quickly. And I have found with myself that, look, here's another way to look at it. If we don't make right decisions and we don't do the right thing, life has a tendency of hitting us with a big stick. But when we look back at it, we go, dang, I should have changed way before this negative situation happened. Because if I would have changed a little bit on my own, guess what? This overly negative situation wouldn't happen to me. So fighting change and trying to control change, you're not going to control change. The world has evolved, things evolve. There's nothing, even like people go, well, Brad, just calm down, man. I just want to keep making what I'm making for the next 5 years and I'm going to be fine. I'm like, no, you're not, because there's such a thing as inflation. So if you make what you're making now for the next 5 years, guess what? Your quality of life's down about 20% of what it was 5 years ago. So anyway, enough about the change deal. It's extremely important to keep moving and keep changing along with the time. The biggest thing, though, 5 big things beforehand. Confidence in yourself. That is extremely important. Stop the negative self-talk. Stop being fearful of what's going to happen. There's nothing to be fearful of. Face the fear and make a decisive action, whatever situation you're in. Never has it ever been a great situation to stay put in what could be maybe a negative situation. Make better decisions. And it just starts slow. And if the decisions you're making are producing the fruit that you want to produce, then guess what? Keep making those decisions. But if the decisions you're making are not producing the fruit that you want to produce, change. I tell this story all the time. Anybody that knows me knows for 20 years, I've been talking about I want to lose 20 pounds. And for 20 years, I get on the scale, and the scale ain't changed very much. How many new scales do you think I bought in the last 20 years? 0. It ain't the scale. Unless I change what I'm doing in my physical world, like change my exercise, change my intake, stop eating late at night. Why would the scale change? Same thing with our lives. Unless we make these positive changes and make better decisions, if the fruit you're producing is not the fruit you want, then guess what? You've got to make other decisions, and you got to figure out what you can do to make better decisions so that it can change what you're producing. The other thing is forgiveness is a huge deal. Make sure forgiveness. Don't hold on. The only person that gets hurt in a situation where you're not forgiving people is yourself. And then it's going to change, guys. Things are going to change. But I think out of those 5, the top 2 things are be confident in yourself. See yourself like I see you. See yourself like other people see you. I can't tell you how many times a friend or my wife or one of my kids has typed to me a letter, and I'm reading this letter, I'm like, man, how are these people seeing me better than I'm seeing myself? Sometimes I'm my own worst enemy. You got to stop that. And I've been in these situations, is that negative self-talk. When you get into those situations, you literally have to inventory what you're saying, and then there are certain things that they're positive, optimistic things. It's like changing, when you're in a negative situation, you just keep replaying this over and over and over again. And what you literally have to do is force your mind to play something over and over that has a positive outcome. Let me give you another example. I've said this before. I was going through this divorce. I kept calling this buddy, and I was telling him about how this marriage went to crap and what happened. And I'd keep him on the phone 30, 45 minutes, and I'd just tell him the same story over and over. And I'll never forget, he got irritated with me calling him. He goes, here's the deal, Brad. Here's what I want you to do. When's your next day off? I said Sunday. He goes, great. I want you to go in the closet. It's what he told me. Go in the closet, shut the closet door, and I want you to tell yourself this divorce story for 8 straight hours. And I'm like, bro, I'm not doing that. That's stupid. Why would I do that? Why would I waste my only day off sitting in the closet telling myself the story over and over again? He goes, exactly. So if you wouldn't do it for 8 hours, why would you do it for 1 hour? Remember, the things that we're consuming it has a huge effect on what we're producing. Go bear grapefruit, guys. Thanks for tuning in. This is Brad with Be Real. See ya.